welcome to the Achieve Nothing podcast. I'm your host, Sherri Davidoff, and I'm pleased to have Peter Arant here today. Peter is a security consultant specializing in healthcare and GDPR compliance for LMG Security. And Peter has some news for us, so welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Sherri. Appreciate you having me along. And today we're going to be talking about a big settlement that Anthem actually just paid to the Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights. So it happened this week, actually, so pretty timely news.
Yeah, I know Anthem's been in the news for a few years. When did they have their original breach?
So this one actually occurred, at least it was discovered in January of 2015.
So this has been a while that they've been working on this case.
It is, so yeah, and like anything dealing with the federal government, things kind of take a while to kind of move along, and this has been going on between Anthem and the federal government for a while in terms of with HHS, and now they have actually reached a settlement in this matter.
Gotcha. And so Anthem, just to back up, exposed the personal information of 78.8 million people out there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So probably many of you may have received a letter from Anthem. So what's the risk of this being stolen? How does this hurt consumers?
Good question. So medical information is really rich in terms of identifiers. There are a lot of things like social security numbers, dates of birth, other stuff that can be used to steal someone's identity. Of course, medical identity theft is also a big problem as well, because someone can go into a hospital or clinic and try to get a procedure done, pretend to be someone else, get it done. That other someone else, if you will, actually gets the bill for it. So
they can leverage my insurance or other things.
Exactly.
So fraud, of different types of fraud. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, so was this a fine? Tell me a little bit more about the news that we have today.
Good question. So I think it's important to distinguish between a fine and a settlement, and this actually was a settlement. So this is
not a fine.
Right, but we're talking about $16 million. So for all practical purposes, if we want to call it a fine, that's fine. But technically speaking, it is a settlement because HHS settled with Anthem for this amount, for $16 million, and they have to do some other things as well.
So that means they've been negotiating for a while, and they've finally both agreed and said, we agree we're going to pay this.
Exactly. So Anthem is not saying, hey, we did something wrong, we're not admitting to any kind of liability in it. They're saying, sure, we're going to settle this, and we'll pay the fine, and we'll do this corrective action plan to sort of make things better.
So I think that was an important point. So Anthem did not admit any guilt, is that right?
That's right, and that's sort of the case with a lot of legal settlements. People say, I'm not admitting to any wrongdoing, however, I'll go ahead and pay you what you want just to make this thing go away or just to resolve it. It's better that way, so they don't want something in writing saying, we did something wrong here.
Okay. I forgot to mention, by the way, that Peter is a licensed attorney. I'm not an attorney, but Peter can actually say, I am an attorney. Right. So question, since you're an attorney, do you think that Anthem's legal bills were more or less than $16 million?
Well, I think if you take this one and all of the other ones and all the rest, it would not surprise me if probably more.
Their legal bills are probably more than this settlement. That would be my bet.
I think so.
Yeah. So if you have a breach, does that mean you're going to pay a fine? I mean, what kind of precedent does this set?
Good question. So I get that question a lot, and the answer to the short answer is it's not always the case. You're going to have to pay some sort of a settlement or a fine if you have a breach. Okay. So what happens if you are in healthcare, you are what's called a covered entity, and you experience a breach, which is a term of art. You can look under the breach notification rule to see what that actually means. And if you have experienced a breach involving protected health information, then you have to notify HHS about it. You have to notify the individuals about it. And if it's a big enough case, then OCR, the Office for Civil Rights within HHS, which investigates these things, they will do a lot of times what's called a compliance review and look into the entity, say how well are your security practices and what happened, et cetera, et cetera. And usually how you respond in that case and what you do is a lot of times going to dictate whether you're going to have to pay something out or not. In a lot of cases, smaller ones, small minor breaches happen all the time. Big things like this are going to get their attention, and regulators are going to come in and look into a company's practices.
I like the swooping motion you're making as regulators swoop in to examine the organization.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that breaches happen, but how you respond is maybe even more important?
Exactly. So if you were, for example, to sweep it under the rug,
Sweeping motion.
to not do anything about it, exactly. You're covering up if you're not doing sort of the right thing, if you will, to notify people about what happened and to take corrective action, that's going to go against you when they swoop in on you. So
sweeping results in swooping.
Exactly.
Okay, got
Good
it.
way to think about it for sure.
Okay.
So,
how did the Anthem attack happen in the first place, or the Anthem breach?
So the report that we heard was that it was spear phishing related.
Right. So. Okay. So phishing email is still a really top cause of these breaches.
Huge.
And one thing that I noticed was that they said one of the causes, or that it was a sophisticated cyber attack. And I don't know if you remember when that terminology came out, but I think it was about 2010 when Google got hacked and RSA got hacked that we started to see these notification letters talking about these sophisticated cyber attacks. And that's kind of become common terminology now.
Well, for sure. And if you think about of course, the size and scope, 78 million records, usually probably going to be some sort of a very sophisticated actor involved in many cases.
So why did OCR, I guess they didn't find them, but are there any reasons that they gave for the size of this settlement?
I think they didn't go into too much detail in terms of why they usually are pretty quick and to the point in terms of the actual settlement itself, the resolution agreement, and then the press release. But you kind of get they'll give you sort of the high-level bullet points of what happened, but not get into all the ins and outs of, how do they respond? And they were kind of slow to respond here. But one thing that was mentioned is that they were, OCR was already in the midst of investigating Anthem when this occurred. Then this occurred, they had to, of course, notify, like I mentioned earlier, with the breach notification rule. And so it was likely that something had already happened before, while OCR was swooping it on him, and so that probably led to the high fine, which, to be clear, is the highest that we've ever seen by a long shot. The highest one before this was like $5.5 million.
Oh wow! Okay.
So up till now,
this is a little unusual. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing rumors that they hadn't conducted a proper risk assessment and things like that. So I think it's those gaps in compliance that can really hurt you after the fact.
Exactly. And I think a good thing to do if you're worried, if you're in healthcare, for example, you could look at this resolution agreement, look in what's called Appendix A. It's the end of the document. It'll tell you all the things that Anthem is supposed to do as part of their corrective action plan. So my recommendation would be to be doing those things already. So in the event that you are investigated, well, guess what? OC already has a checklist. Do your
risk assessment.
Do all this, policies and procedures you need in place, and training and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you're already doing those things and you have a breach, well, guess what? OCR is probably going to be a lot more lenient, and there are so many breaches that occur, that we never even hear about, that are resolved sort of administratively between OCR and the entity, and never really reaches the light of day, if you will.
Okay, because they're doing their due diligence and they've checked those check boxes.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So I think what I've learned today is that it's all about how you react, and a little bit of preparation is absolutely key to making sure that these are resolved quietly and effectively.
Exactly. Yep.
Great. Is there anything else you want to add for our audience?
Not that I can think of, but yeah, again, huge event, $16 million settlement, and 78 million records. So huge case, huge development. So
it's finally over, and Anthem can move on, hopefully.
Let's see what happens.
Yep.
So
thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye.